George Washington and the General's Dog by Frank Murphy. George Washington is one of America's greatest heroes. Most people know that George was honest and brave, but there is something about George that people don't always know. George Washington loved animals. George learned to ride horses as a boy. Sometimes he rode into town. George rode fast, but he never fell. People said he was the best rider they had ever seen. When George grew up, he moved to a farm called Mount Vernon. Every day, George checked on the horses and hogs. He checked on the oxen, mules, and sheep. But he spent most time with his dogs. George had a lot of dogs. He owned 36 dogs in his lifetime. He took them hunting. He played with them. He even gave them cute names like Mopsy, Sweet Lips, and True Love. Sometimes George spoiled his dogs. He let them run around the house. One day, George's wife Martha cooked a ham for dinner. George's dog Vulcan jumped up and stole the ham right off the table. Martha chased after him, but George just laughed. George liked being at Mount Vernon with Martha and the animals, but America needed him. America was not yet its own country. It was an English colony. That means it belonged to England. Many American colonists wanted to be free from England, so they went to war. The war was called the American Revolution. The colonists chose George to be their general. George chose his favorite dog, Sweet Lips, to go with him. He said goodbye to Martha and Mount Vernon. He jumped on his horse, Nelson. Then he rode into battle. Sweet Lips was right beside him. In George's day, soldiers often brought dogs with them to war. Dogs helped hunt. Dogs helped track the way. Dogs helped guard against wild animals. Best of all, dogs were great partners. The general of the English army was named William Howe. He had a dog too. He also had 9,000 soldiers. They had plenty of supplies. George did not have nearly as many supplies. Sometimes his soldiers were cold. Sometimes they were hungry, but they did not give up. In the fall of 1777, George's troops went to Pennsylvania. They were fighting the English troops. Guns fired, rat-a-tat-tat, cannons roared, boom, bang, smoke filled the air. Finally, the fighting ended. The English soldiers went back to their camp. The battle was over for the day. The smoke began to clear. George noticed a dog without a soldier. It looked lost. George bent down and patted the dog's head. The dog followed George back to the colonist camp. He wagged his tail. "Whose dog is this?" wondered George. George looked at the dog's collar. The tag had a man's name on it. That name was William Howe. William Howe? George couldn't believe his eyes. William Howe was the enemy. Word about the enemy dog spread through camp. Some of George's men wanted to keep the dog, but George said no. George believed the dog belonged with his master. George had his friend, Alexander Hamilton, write a note to General Howe. The note said that George wanted to return the dog. Both sides raised white flags. The white flags meant no one could fight. George's soldiers walked the dog across the battlefield. They gave him back to General Howe. People in England found out about George's good deed. The English still wanted to beat George and win the war, but now they respected him. Some English people even liked him. They had never heard a story of such great kindness between enemies. In 1783, America won the war against England. America became its very own country. George Washington went home to Mount Vernon. Friends around the world wanted to honor George. They wondered what he would like, and then they remembered the story about the dog. Soon, presents started arriving at Mount Vernon. The King of Spain sent George a mule. George named him Royal Gift. A friend from France gave George an even bigger gift, 7 dogs from the Marquis de Lafayette. George's work was not done, though. The American people needed a leader. They elected George to be their first president. People all over America loved their new president. They cheered when he rode by in his carriage. They knew it was him because his 6 white horses always led the way. Author's note: the stories in this book are true. We can't be sure exactly how they all happened, but we've tried our best to show the way things might have been. George Washington with Nelson. Alexander Hamilton. William Howe. George Washington's actual letter to General Howe. It says, General Washington's compliments to General Howe, does himself the pleasure to return him a dog, which accidentally fell into his hands, and by the inscription on the collar appears to belong to General Howe.